But they were willing to go into the middle of the Amish farm and get those sheep and still risk their lives, knowing that the danger that's posed by getting anywhere remotely close to human habitation. And their whatever instinct is overriding another instinct. Their self-survival instinct of knowing a human means death for them or their family or whatever it is. How many of coyotes have been killed? Thousands up and down the valleys here. They know every time they see a human, a gunshot rings out and one of their pack dies. They were willing to override that to go in to get the food this year. Like one primal instinct was overridden by another. And it really begs to, what's going on here with nature in itself? What can we learn from that where one primal instinct will override another primal instinct? Hyperinflation, 11 million job openings, and an energy crisis. Sound familiar? It's like Jimmy Carter in the 1970s all over again. Americans are paying twice as much at the gas pump and the grocery store. The Democrats control all three branches of government, and there's just a couple of questions you need to ask yourself. Do you think you'll be better off in 2022 than you have been in 2021? And do you think the stock market will trade higher the next 3 years than it did from 2016 to 2020? If the answer is no, learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer from 2016 to present, click on the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. I had so much positive feedback. Dan Schultz, moving into the positivity with the changes and offering solutions, discussing some of the problems and things that we're facing. And there's been such an uptick, even in the last 6 months since we went around our last interview here. But the problems we face are all in your face. And when I say that, it's not a slang term, in your face, but it's so obvious for everybody to see now that systems are broken. They're not being repaired. The systems that we know as were efficient are now inefficient. The delays, the economy, the inflation, the lack of food, which I'm going to talk about here with the fertilizer reductions coming in next year, which are absolutely going to impact yields globally. So we'll need to take some solutions for our self-sustainability on that. I was like, everywhere you look, you can see the facade has shattered, and it's kind of looking through a glass window now at the farce that has been the last 100 years of what we consider our society and commerce.
We're on a war cycle. I mean, there's cycles for everything. When Taurus transit, when Uranus transits Taurus, astrologically, we have a war. 84-year cycle. 84 years ago, we had World War II. 84 years before that, we had the Civil War. 84 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. So we're on that.
And where do we sit today in that transit?
Oh, big time.
In the same bullseye zone, don't we?
Same bullseye zone. The World Economic Forum promises us stuff, and it happens. And what are they promising us now? I mean, Christian Westbrook and Ice Age.
The Great Reset and the Great Narrative.
Well, they're promising us a cyber attack. Klaus Schwab says it will make the coronavirus pandemic look like a minor disturbance. He says they're promising us a cyber attack and grid down. So no matter how you slice this, inevitably through a solar flare because of our magnetosphere declining, but in so many other ways. Mark my words. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, I guarantee it won't be the last, because we will have a grid down. And maybe you're right, David. Maybe they do a cyber attack and they only leave it down for a month, shake us all up, so we get into the greater reset. Or maybe it's 2 years. Maybe the Chinese and North Koreans blow off a bunch of EMPs and we're back to the Stone Age. And all you have to do is use your imagination And just imagine life without electricity. It's a hell of a ride, as things degenerate into warlords or who knows. There'll be pockets of people that keep their compassion and their reason and keep their humanity through all this. And, but, regardless of how you look at that scenario, all of the things that David talks about, foraging. Just recently on one of your podcasts, you were talking about distilling alcohol, making rubbing alcohol. All of this stuff. My first recommendation, I talk to people all the time about this. My first recommendation is just start doing something. Maybe you want to make rubbing alcohol. That's the first thing that you do. It's one of my favorite, Bill Mollison. He has 12 permaculture principles. And I think it's his third. One of his principles is obtain a yield.
Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned that before.
Yeah, it means, to me, yes, that's in the realm of growing food, but it's bigger than that. To me, it's really a metaphor that, if you live in an apartment in a city, even if you live rurally, all of these things, and the changes are happening so fast. There's an acceleration of everything. If you're not getting ready, your head's not in the game. And the reason why I like to frame this situation to manage in these ways is that it's just time to act, time to start growing food, time to start growing community, time to start, learning all of the skills to get ready. Otherwise, you're going to be in a reactive state. It's going to freak you out. You're going to panic. Who knows what's going to happen? David?
I'm going to disagree with you. Good. Because making moonshine is a science. Very clean science on temperatures, ratios, batches, and then percentages. But I'll do it old school style, and just like the old time dudes here, they shake the bottle to kind of see what the proof is. The more bubbles in the bottle, the higher the proof. And that's no joke. Like these old time guys, the way they do it, they're not really, putting the hydrometer in there to see what the alcohol content is. They're just shaking the bottle and, oh, the bubbles are still pretty big. It must be about 130. And then I ended up getting 10 pounds of non-GMO cornmeal from the Amish before they just closed. So even for us living out here in the countryside, Amish closed down for the rest of the season. So they're not going to be back open until March again. A lot of people's plan was, if the supermarket like Costco doesn't have anything, if XYZ doesn't have anything, I'm going to go to the farmer's market and I'm going to go to the Amish. Well, for these next 4 months, there's no farmer's markets either. They won't start kicking off until March, and they'll probably just have supple leafy greens. That's all they'll have, because that's pretty much what comes on first here that you'll start to see at the farmer's markets. So I ended up getting 10 pounds of non-GMO cornmeal, and I got the yeast here, got the sugar, got 50 pounds of sugar. And I got extra sugar stored aside for this very purpose. And I got the still out there, temperature controlled, 165, take the heads off of that. And once everything stops distilling at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, then you turn it up to 175. And then that's where you get the drinkable alcohol run out of that. And that'll taper off. And you got the kind of, would say like cardboardy, you'll just know when it's finished. It has sort of a cardboard taste, smell. It's definitely changed at the ends where you get the tails. Well, then you start saving those two. And since neither of them are drinkable, you just combine them. I know they're going to distill at different temperatures again, but triple distillations. And then but that means you need to run 3 full batches of regular moonshine run or schnapps. You got the pears, you got the apples. There's a lot of apples coming in season right now. You could do a fruit batch just like they do in Europe more than they do in the US. But think about where your ingredients are going to come from as some of these channels are cut off. So one of our main supplies, which was the Amish farm for all things nice going into the belly that we can't provide ourselves, like the sheep. So I ended up buying a 105-pound lamb over there. And, we stocked our freezer with that. But they had sold out of their lambs. So we went to go get one just last week to see if we could get another, bring us through the winter season here. And he's like, Wolves got 4 of them, which they were planning to sell. And then they had sold the others. But let that sink in for a second. These groups of families have done this for 150 plus years here.
Mhm.
They are masters at what we consider almost alchemy to get plants to grow.
Absolutely.
In things that are seemingly impossible that they're able to pull off, from gravity fed water systems transiting miles over hillsides in old rusty pipes and things that you think that who would ever use that kind of stuff, to getting the most magical foods out of seemingly soils that aren't really that rich. But animal husbandry is one of their key things as well, because they do raise the sheep. Now, for them to have the guard dogs out there at all times and them themselves looking for predators, for wolves to come in and snag 4 of their lambs for the year over this last 2 months, that's unheard of. Even they were saying that it seems that nature is over hungry. And the amount of ladybugs also that had come out during this late season warmth here, oh my, everybody was talking about just literally how many, way over the normal amount there were. And the carpenter bees, I like to call them wood bees because they eat everything out of your wood. The carpenter bees here, again, the same thing. Everybody's talking about how voracious and ferocious and unbelievable numbers and never ending just onslaught of these carpenter bees this year.
Yeah.
And it's just been one thing after another, indicating that nature's also alerting itself, and we as humans probably miss those signals, that if the wolves are willing to come in, or I should say the coyotes are willing to come in that deeply way into the Amish farms to try to snag a sheep, knowing that they're in danger themselves. Because everywhere around here, anytime you see a coyote, shoot it on sight. And I know a lot of people don't agree with that, and they say, well, that's so inhumane. No, it's not. When they're taking the dogs, the chickens, the goats, the sheep, and when you get into a pack of them, if there's a very small newborn calf, they'll try to take that too. So around here, it's open season on coyote all the time, anytime, everywhere you see it, backyard, front yard, anywhere you can get on a clear line of sight. Obviously, be careful with your firearms. Can't just be blasting off anywhere. But if you can take a coyote out safely without, sending shrapnel somewhere else into your neighbor's, wall or whatnot, then do it, because they're a predator here, and there's a huge amount of them up and down the valleys too. Like the coyotes have gone overboard in the numbers this year in terms of how close they come in, because normally they know that they're hunted on the spot. The reason I told you that is these coyotes are smart. They're like dogs. They know every time they come in with sight of a human, they're shot at. But they were willing to go into the middle of the Amish farm and get those sheep and still risk their lives, knowing that the danger that's posed by getting anywhere remotely close to human habitation. And their whatever instinct is overriding another instinct. Their self-survival instinct of knowing a human means death for them or their family or whatever it is. How many of coyotes have been killed? Thousands up and down the valleys here. They know every time they see a human, a gunshot rings out and one of their pack dies. They were willing to override that to go in to get the food this year. Like one primal instinct was overridden by another. And it really begs to, what's going on here with nature in itself? What can we learn from that, where one primal instinct will override another primal instinct?
I'd like to appeal to the audience the portion of the audience who is maybe on the edge and maybe is not, for most Americans, are not comfortable taking the dive into a more natural life or a sustainable, self-sufficient life. I've had people say, I don't want to be a prepper. We talked about this last time. I always say too bad.
Yeah, right.
But, the thing about it is when you embrace this natural life, whether it's foraging or alcohol making, any of the things that you talk about all the time, and I talk about all the time, the way that we live at Patriot Mountain Village, is the thing is that it is so satisfying. I'll tell you why. I think that we have made an abstraction. We're not into reality anymore. The monetary industrial system has removed us from our humanness in some ways and removed us from nature. Somebody wrote a book called Nature Deficit Syndrome. You don't even have to read the book. The title tells you what it's about.
Living in a city.
We all have it. And but the deep part of that is that like people like to eat chicken. But if you're uncomfortable killing a chicken, then your food has become an abstraction. If you're a part of an online community, then community has become an abstraction to you. Even though you could make I get the argument. If germs and mice and manure, if manure is yucky, dirt is dirty, and germs are a fear thing, then your actual biome has become an abstraction. And when you embrace killing a chicken, if you are a meat eater, when you embrace germs and soil and manure, there's something real about life. And I've always said that my favorite movie of all time is The Matrix. And when Morpheus said, there's something wrong with the world, it's like a splinter in your mind. You're born into a world that you can't taste or touch. It's this paradigm, this abstraction that we live in, where we're divorced from nature and humanity. And when you start living in ways where you're doing something as simple as procuring your own heat, your firewood, you're growing the marigold, you're growing a tomato. I'm somebody who 13 years ago, I never grew a tomato, a flower in my life. I was a suburb, eating out at restaurants. Most of my diet was organic, but I didn't know anything. I never grew anything in my entire life, not even a flower. I never had pots in my apartment when I was in school. And it's quite a journey to go from that divorced life to starting to embrace this natural, in many ways, the natural world is one of surviving. This is what people have done. Getting through winter is a big deal. We survived through winter. We worked hard in the fall. We harvested, we preserved, we canned, we salted, we smoked, we dried. All of those things, in the midst of the imperative of surviving, you will find tremendous satisfaction. That is one of my messages. Because people think of being a prepper as a hard life. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be suffering. And I'm here to tell you that it is a deeply soulful, satisfying life. We were just commenting the other day because it's getting dark. And one of our new members said, I used to, when I lived in my house, I used to stay up until 11:30, noon, 2 o'clock in the morning, doing crafts. She didn't have TV, but I stayed up until 10, 11 o'clock at night. And now we sleep with the natural cycles. When it gets dark at 5 o'clock, most people turn in for the day. Now she sleeps like 10 hours. And I think it's natural to sleep for 8, 9, 10 hours during the winter. It's dark when you have artificial lights, which we live relatively, we do have lights, but we turn in, we live with natural cycles. When you live with the seasons and the weather and the cycles, even the daily cycles, there's a being in tune with nature in a way that a person who lives with a climate controlled building with lights, they stay up until midnight, they binge watch Lost in Space or some other, they're on Netflix until 1 o'clock in the morning. It is an unnatural cycle that leads us, I argue, it leads us to obsession and addiction and discontentedness because you are out of tune with natural cycles.
That's deep. Yeah, and speaking of an abstraction here, I want to tell you a story.
That's it.
I got cameras put up around the property so we could obviously see who's coming in. If there's anything poking its head around at night. And when we put the camera in, it was still pretty clear. There were a few branches hanging over. And for me, it didn't register, but the guys who were helping me put the camera in went up with a pair of, pruners and went and snipped a couple branches, but they snipped a Japanese honeysuckle. And a friend of mine had been here not just days earlier and had been wild foraging around and dug up some roots to make tinctures from and cut a few things to scrape some bark and all this. So when I saw him hit that specific plant, knowing you can make a tea out of it, he cut another plant. I said, well, I'm not really familiar with that one. What can you use that for? And he looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, you cut the Japanese honeysuckle. I thought you were, just wild foraging. You were going to take some stuff home with you. Feel free and cut as much as you want and take back with you, natural remedy, whatever. It's natural forest is a huge free supermarket out here. And he looks at me and he goes, no, I was just clearing the line of sight for the cameras. But his worker that was with him was, all right, man, we're at a different level here. And it really was like something I perceived as a different context in it, trimming the tree to actually take a medicinal or take something that was a tea for a sore throat off of the plant. I thought he was really wild harvesting because, I was in that mind frame of thinking about what could be taken, eaten, used. So anytime something's trimmed and it's a usable, I'm like, all right, cool. But it just didn't dawn on me that they were just trimming the tree line to make a clear line of sight. I mean, it did afterward and we had a good laugh about it, but those two different worlds are going to connect or collide or, meet in the middle here somewhere real soon and real short. So, going from mind frame like that, on the outside of, I never even wild harvested anything once in my life, like you were talking about, all the way over into, all right, it's a thing in the spring. I'm waiting for the natural vegetation to come back. And then another thing that's out of sync here, it's going to be 72 degrees next week. And the plants have already gone dormant. So for 4 days, it'll be in the high 60s, low 70s, bright sunlight for 4 to 5 days next week, going into the 20th of December. So, how are the plants going to respond to that? Like last year, we lost all the wine vines because we put them in, they started throwing leaf, and then we had this incredible super freeze come in for 4 straight days, killed everything we lost all the blooms. There was no fruit this year, barely down of anybody's farms around here, or we were getting these little tiny cherries because the first year plantings in the dwarf varieties. Nature's throwing curveballs, humans are being thrown curveballs, and with the magnetosphere waning, you just have to think about how is that going to affect the human perception or the human psyche, because we're right in that magnetic coupling of magnetic hemispheres of the brain. We live on a magnetic thing called the crust with a different charge than the atmosphere. And then we have the whole encapsulated driver of that changing itself, which would explain why the cloud cells and the jet streams are moving, weaker magnetosphere, things aren't locked in as tightly, and the pressure systems aren't wrapping in and staying in the usual areas they would set up for whatever season. And things are almost spinning around. There's a high pressure over Greenland right now, but that blocking high pressure is forcing cooler air further down, Texas, Mexico, Florida here. But as it spins around the high pressure, it's almost looping all the way clear back to the point where there's going to be a giant vortice in the atmosphere. If it goes another 1,000 miles back to where it seems to be pinging off, it'll turn in. And you'd have to wonder, are some of these events recorded in history where you get a break off of that and it'll start circulating on itself and creating its own weather pattern? And these are the things that are setting up as we look right now. So as we progress into that magnetic field you're talking about with the gas giants lining up, in earnest, the Earth will be 100% locked in that through the middle of 2025, starting Q1 of next year. So no later than March. It depends. It's a few days here, a few days there. You determine it on where your line is, where Jupiter swings past the Earth. Where they're both moving. One's moving faster than the other, so they're playing this little catch-up game until the Earth gets fully into that field. And from that point forward, the vast changes that we're seeing with atmospheric disturbance, magnetosphere declines, and this fashion where who knows if it's going to go from 60 to 20 in a year. You just don't know. Is it going to progress even further into some other declines? And, you're looking at where the magnetic field positions, the north south pole are jumping around everywhere. And Ben's mapped it out pretty much where he thinks it might connect somewhere around Indonesia, west of Indonesia, above the equator there. I mean, how fast can all this onset? And how is it going to affect the human psyche? See, this resonance field's changing. You mentioned Taurus there. And astronomy and astrology used to be the same science, and they were dissected about 250 years ago. They were separated. But astronomy shows you the science behind where the planets are lying in their orbits, where our star is in terms of its orbit and then where we sit in the spiral arm of the galaxy. But the astrology explains the energetic frequency that this system passes through on a regular basis in a cycle. So for every 2,000 years, approximately 2,100, each one of these cycle sets is a different energy frequency. It's going to vibrate at either a lower density or a higher density. Faster vibration, things are going to move faster. They're going to be more light vibration, if you will. So the astrology explains the vibration pattern we're going to go through. And where we're going into Aquarius right now, things are going to be moving way faster. Magnetosphere is declining. Our brains are waking up and actuating in different ways that hadn't been seen at least in a couple of thousands of years. So the top-down approach of how to control a civilization, everybody's seeing through it because the vibratory patterns don't match anymore. They're stuck back in some kind of iron thing that's trying to, really control humanity's soul at the deepest levels versus freedom. And now, irregardless of what these systems are trying to control us as, there's other external forces that are awakening the human psyche. And I really think that's the reason that this divide and conquer has come into the family unit